There's something wrong, isn't there? Not with your body. Though let's be honest, your knees do sound like bubble wrap every time you stand up. No, this ache is somewhere else. It's deeper, quiet, persistent, like a smoke alarm you took the battery out of years ago. But it's still beeping. You keep telling yourself it's fine, that you're just tired, that maybe you're too sensitive. But here's a little truth bomb wrapped in dark chocolate. You're not sensitive. You're waking up. What you're feeling is the slow, silent breakdown of the part of you that kept saying yes when everything in your soul screamed run. Carl Jung called it a psychic death. Buddhists call it dukkha, suffering caused by clinging to crap that doesn't serve you anymore, and Ram Dass. He would have smiled and said, yes, you're finally noticing the smell in the spiritual fridge. And now, here you are. Not because someone sent you this video, not for entertainment. You're here because something inside you, some ancient part of your dignity, just sat up in its grave and said, enough. Good. You made it. But I should warn you, this isn't going to be comfortable. This is going to be clarity. And once you see what's been quietly destroying you, you'll never be able to unsee it again. Ready? Let's begin. Behavior 1. Love bombs with expiry dates. Let's start with the most seductive form of destruction affection with strings. You know the type. They pour on the love flatter you endlessly, maybe even bring you soup when you're sick. But the moment you disagree with them, or heaven forbid set a boundary, they act like you just slapped their grandmother and stole their parking spot at the same time. This is emotional manipulation, wearing a soft knitted sweater. Carl Jung warned us people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And one of the most convenient ways build a version of you that serves their ego, then punish you when you deviate. They say things like, I just care about you so much, that's why I'm upset. If you really loved me, you wouldn't need space. You're making me feel guilty for caring. Oh yes, it's all your fault. You're too sensitive, too distant to yourself. In Buddhist terms, this is attachment masquerading as love. When people can't separate love from control, your freedom feels like abandonment to them. So they give you affection on the condition that you stay exactly as they like you, small, agreeable, and available. Let me tell you about Susan. She's 68, lives in Oregon, has 4 grandkids, and 1 very needy daughter. Susan once cancelled her only vacation in 5 years because her daughter said, I just feel weird when you're not here. Translation: how dare you exist outside of my emotional jurisdiction? Susan smiled. She cancelled, and then she got shingles. Listen, love is not a leash. If someone's affection evaporates the moment you say, I need some space, then what they gave you wasn't love. It was emotional credit with high interest. And guess what? You're the one paying off the debt. Jung called it the betrayal of the self. Buddhism calls it clinging. I call it emotional MLM. You're not here to be someone's emotional pet. You're here to walk your path, not be guilt-tripped every time you try to take a step off theirs. So if their love comes with a receipt, refund the whole damn thing. Behavior 2. Weaponized laughter. Here's how it starts. You're in a group, a family gathering, a dinner with friends, maybe even your own living room. Someone makes a joke at your expense, maybe about your memory, your weight, your hearing, your age, your life. Everyone laughs. You force a chuckle. But inside, a little piece of you quietly packs a bag and leaves. Carl Jung once said, the unconscious doesn't play games. It remembers everything. And let me tell you, your inner child. She's keeping score in a tiny notebook with a cracked spine. This isn't humor. It's humiliation with a laugh track. You know who laughs the loudest at these jokes. The ones who are most afraid of their own emptiness. They weaponize humor because it's easier than saying I feel inferior next to you, so I'll make you look foolish before anyone notices I'm drowning. Buddhism calls this right speech, one of the Eightfold Path's golden rules. Right speech isn't about being nice. It's about not using your words as grenades, even if they're wrapped in comedy. Let me introduce you to Marvin. Marvin is 76. He's witty, charming, and got mocked at his retirement party by his best friend who joked that Marvin only retired because he finally ran out of ideas. Everyone laughed. Marvin smiled. But a week later, he started skipping lunches, then stopped returning calls, then disappeared into cable news and crossword puzzles. Because laughter, when turned against someone, doesn't tickle, it wounds. And here's the twisted part: when you react, when you finally say, "Hey, that wasn't funny," you become too sensitive. Now you're the problem, the buzzkill, the old crank who can't take a joke. So you stay quiet. Until one day, the laugh that breaks you isn't theirs, it's yours. Faked, performed, hollow. And you realize somewhere along the way, they didn't just steal your dignity, they taught you to hand it over and thank them for the lesson. Here's a Buddhist koan for the modern age. If a joke hurts you in a forest and everyone else laughs, are you still allowed to leave the forest? Yes. Yes, you are. If their humor requires your humiliation, let the joke die and keep your soul alive. Behavior. 3. Gaslighting for beginners. Ah yes, gaslighting. The subtle art of setting your reality on fire, then handing you a bucket full of self-doubt instead of water. It usually starts with something small. You bring up a conversation from last week. They say it never happened. You express how something made you feel. They say you're overreacting. You catch them lying. They say you're imagining things. And just like that, your mind begins to eat itself. Like a confused GPS, it starts rerouting you away from your own instincts. Carl Jung called this inner betrayal. It's that moment when your psyche, desperate for survival, starts to believe the lie, because it's safer than losing the relationship. That's when you stop trusting your memory, your perception, your gut, and suddenly, your gut's just indigestion. Your memory's getting foggy, your instincts. Well, you've always been too emotional. Welcome to gaslighting. Population you, and your quiet, flickering sense of self. In Buddhism, this is the loss of right view, the first of the eightfold path. Right view isn't just about seeing the world clearly, it's about not letting someone else rent space in your brain and rearrange the furniture. Let me tell you about Henry. Henry is 81, used to work in engineering, and always knew where he left his damn glasses until his partner kept moving them and telling him he was losing it. 2 years later, Henry believed he had early dementia. Turns out his partner just liked winning arguments. Here's the Buddhist part. When you allow others to define reality for you, you suffer not just emotionally, you become karmically entangled in their illusion. And illusion, my friend, is exhausting. Ram Dass once said, "If you think you're free, try spending a weekend with your family." To that I'd add, if you think your memory's failing, ask who's been rewriting the script. Gaslighting isn't just manipulation, it's spiritual identity theft. And the worst part, you start apologizing for being confused when it's their distortion that's real. So let me remind you of something simple and sacred. If it felt wrong, it probably was. If it confused you, it probably wasn't love. And if they need you to doubt yourself to feel right, you're not losing your mind. You're finally seeing theirs. Behavior 4. Emotional minimalism. There's a special kind of violence that doesn't raise its voice, it just shrugs. It shrugs at your pain. It tilts its head at your heartbreak. It sighs at your sadness and then calls you dramatic. Welcome to emotional minimalism, the casual dismissal of your inner world. It's the art of telling someone their wounds aren't deep enough to bleed. You finally speak up after hours or decades of holding it in, and what do you get? You're always making a big deal out of nothing. You need to toughen up. Bjam. Is this going to be one of your emotional days? Congratulations, you've just shared your soul and someone handed you back a blank stare. Carl Jung warned that what we repress doesn't disappear, it festers. The sadness you suppress today becomes tomorrow's insomnia. The anger you bottle up becomes your ulcer's favorite bedtime story. And in Buddhism, this denial of feeling is the exact opposite of mindfulness. To be mindful is to hold your emotions like a crying baby, not to leave them on the porch with a note that says, "Grow up." Let me tell you about Lorraine. Lorraine is 79. After her husband died, she heard, "At least you had 50 years together, more times than she heard. How are you feeling?" She stopped talking about her grief altogether until it started showing up in her chest, her dreams, and her drinking habits. It's not that she didn't feel, it's that no one else could handle her feeling. And so she became a quiet thunderstorm in orthopedic shoes. This behavior doesn't always come from cruelty, it often comes from emotional laziness. People don't want to dig that deep. They'd rather skim your pain like it's a headline in a tabloid they never wanted to buy. And let's be honest, for many elders, we were trained to do the same to ourselves. Don't cry. Don't talk back. Don't burden people. We were taught to zip up our feelings like a suitcase full of shame. But here's your Buddhist permission slip. Your emotions are valid. They are visitors, not criminals. So the next time someone dismisses your pain like it's background noise, remember, you are not too much. They are just emotionally tone deaf. And your grief doesn't need their permission to be real. Behavior 5, the silent treatment assassin. Let's be clear, this isn't about healthy solitude. It's about weaponized absence. It's not a peaceful pause, it's a punishment in disguise. You speak your truth. You set a boundary. You show a flicker of backbone. And suddenly, silence. No reply. No eye contact. No good night. Just the quiet hum of your refrigerator and the echo of your own heartbeat, wondering what the hell you did wrong. Carl Jung called this shadow projection through emotional withdrawal. Translation: people who can't face their own shame often punish others by disappearing so they don't have to be accountable. And in doing so, they don't just avoid you, they erase you. In Buddhism, this is the opposite of compassionate presence. Silence, when used to avoid or punish, is a denial of interconnection, a spiritual ghosting of the soul. Let me tell you about Arthur. Arthur is 80. He told his adult son he didn't feel respected lately. That's all he said. His son replied, "I'll call you tomorrow." That was 3 months ago. Arthur has been waiting by the phone every morning since drinking lukewarm coffee and pretending he's not checking the time. Here's the cruel genius of the silent treatment. It forces you to fill in the blanks. You start to invent reasons, apologize for things you haven't done, make peace offerings for a war you didn't start. And if you grew up in a home where love was earned by being quiet and good, this silence doesn't just sting. It reactivates every childhood wound in your spiritual library. Ram Dass might have called this a God-shaped void being used as emotional extortion. And the worst part, when you try to talk about it, they say, "I just needed space." No, they needed power. Silence isn't always serene. Sometimes it's a scalpel. So if you're sitting in a quiet room wondering what you did wrong, check the furniture. If you're the only one holding love, truth, and humility, maybe it's not your job to fix the silence. Maybe it's your job to walk out of it. Behavior 6, noble self-erasure. You're so selfless, we forgot you exist, not you. Let's talk about one of the most dangerous lies ever sold, especially to women, elders, caregivers, and anyone with a servant's heart. You're such a good person for always putting others first. Sounds like a compliment, doesn't it? It's not. It's a eulogy with nice lighting. Because what they're really saying is, you're very convenient. You make life easier for everyone around you. You bleed quietly. Carl Jung warned that when we lose touch with the self, the real center of who we are, we become fragmented. Broken not in pieces, but in postures. Always bent towards someone else's needs. Always reaching toward their approval. Eventually, you're not a person anymore. Just a support beam in everyone else's emotional architecture. And in Buddhism, this is spiritual bypassing at its finest. The idea that sacrifice is always noble, that love is proven by suffering, that letting yourself disappear is somehow holy. Spoiler alert, it's not enlightenment. It's codependence with better PR. Let me tell you about Teresa. Teresa is 77. She hasn't chosen a restaurant in 14 years. Whatever you want has been her official dinner order for over a decade. Her family calls her so easygoing. Inside, Teresa doesn't even remember if she likes Italian food anymore. She just remembers that the last time she said no, her daughter cried, and she apologized for causing pain. That's not selflessness. That's emotional hostage-taking with a smile. And here's the real kicker. When you make self-erasure your default setting, people don't thank you. They just expect it. You become invisible, not sacred. Ram Dass once said, "You can only give what you're not busy protecting. But if you give so much that nothing's left, you're not generous, you're gone." So let's be blunt. If you say yes to everyone else, but never to yourself, don't be shocked when you forget who you are. Sacrifice in its purest form is beautiful. But chronic self-sacrifice is spiritual auto-cannibalism. You start eating away at your own soul just to keep the peace. And here's a Buddhist truth they never put on greeting cards. Peace that demands your silence isn't peace. It's obedience. Behavior 7. Abusive belonging. Somewhere along the line, you were taught that being alone was worse than being erased. And so you stayed. You stayed in relationships that made you shrink, in friend groups that laughed at your expense, in family systems where love came with conditions: be agreeable, be quiet, be useful. Don't ask for too much. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you were loyal to a version of love that was never real. Carl Jung called this state the psychic death. It's when the true self doesn't scream anymore. It just sits in the corner, watching you perform a version of yourself to keep the tribe happy. And in Buddhism, this is the ultimate form of attachment, grasping for connection, even if it's toxic, because the alternative feels like falling off a cliff. Let me tell you about Donna. Donna is 85. Her bridge club mocks her daughter forgets her birthday, and her husband stopped speaking to her in full sentences sometime around 1997. But when you ask her why she stays, she shrugs and says, "Well, at least I'm not alone. At least. At least is the motto of the spiritually starving. At least I have someone. At least they didn't hit me. At least I'm not abandoned." But here's the truth that makes people squirm. You don't have to be alone to be abandoned. And what you've been calling belonging may just be a long-term lease on your own abandonment with free coffee and monthly guilt. Ram Dass once joked, "We're all just walking each other home." But what if the people you're walking with keep pushing you into the bushes? If you have to betray yourself to be included, you're not in a circle, you're in a trap. So let's make it plain. If staying costs you your peace, your boundaries, your joy, or your voice, it's not belonging. It's emotional squatting, and you're the one paying rent. Behavior 8. The kind narcissist trap. Let's get one thing straight. Not all narcissists are loud. Some bake you muffins, some text you inspirational quotes, some call you sweetheart right before emotionally kneecapping you. This is the kind narcissist, the person who never raises their voice, because they've learned it's far more effective to weaponize politeness. At first they seem perfect, supportive, available, empathetic. They'll tell you how proud they are of you. They'll show up when others don't. They'll just want what's best until you change, you grow, you disagree. Then the compliments vanish like your social battery at a family reunion. Suddenly they're distant, cold, disappointed. They don't yell, they sigh. They don't argue, they withdraw support. And just like that, you're scrambling to get back in their good graces. Carl Jung would call this the inflated persona, a carefully curated identity that thrives on control masked as kindness. The problem isn't that they want to love you. It's that they want to own the version of you that never says no. In Buddhist psychology, this is craving in disguise. They crave closeness, but only on their terms. When you break the mold, their love curdles into subtle punishment. They're not loving you, they're loving who you are when you're compliant. Let me tell you about Evelyn. She's 72. Her church friend Sharon used to check on her daily until Evelyn joined a meditation group instead of Bible study. Now Sharon says things like, "I just pray you find your way back," with the same energy as someone offering a hug while slowly locking the door behind them. That's not compassion. That's ego dressed in pearls. Ram Dass once said, "Our desire to be seen as good is just another costume we wear to the masquerade ball. Here's your mirror. If someone only treats you well when you play the role they've written, you're not in a relationship. You're in a rehearsal for a play called Don't Disappoint Me. Love that punishes independence isn't love. It's conditional approval. And that's just sugar-coated control." So next time someone praises you while holding the leash a little tighter, remember, you weren't born to be adored into obedience. Behavior 9. Spiritual guilt tripping. Ah yes, nothing says personal growth like being cornered with a Buddha quote by the very person who wounded you. This is spiritual guilt tripping, and it's the emotional version of being slapped with a meditation cushion. It sounds like, "I thought you were more evolved than this." You call yourself spiritual, but you're holding a grudge. "I already said sorry." A real healer would have let it go by now. Translation: your healing is taking too long, and it's making me uncomfortable. Could you speed that up so I can feel like a good person again? Carl Jung warned us about the inflated ego, masters virtue people who use the language of healing to avoid doing any actual healing. They wear compassion like a costume and throw around forgiveness like it's a coupon they're mad you haven't redeemed yet. In Buddhism, this is the opposite of right intention. Real spiritual growth isn't about pressuring others into premature peace. It's about holding space for pain, even when that pain points back to you. Let me tell you about Charles. Charles is 79. After finally confronting his brother for years of subtle cruelty, his brother lit up the group chat with, "I send love and light to those still trapped in bitterness." Charles didn't reply. He just forwarded the message to his therapist with the subject line, "I'm going to scream." Ram Dass once said, "If you think you're so enlightened, go spend a weekend with your parents. We'll do you one better try standing your ground with someone who thinks your boundary is a spiritual failure." Here's the truth. Forgiveness is a path, not a command. You don't owe anyone your healing on their timeline. You can walk toward peace while still recognizing a boundary is necessary. So next time someone quotes Rumi to silence your pain, hand them this Buddhist reminder. Compassion without accountability is just manipulation in a robe. You are not less spiritual for protecting yourself. You are not less evolved for needing distance. And you are not obligated to turn the other cheek if both cheeks are already bruised. So here we are. 9 behaviors, 9 psychic termites, 9 ways you've been taught to shrink and smile through it until now. Maybe some of these felt familiar, maybe all of them did, and maybe for the first time you're not blaming yourself for bleeding where someone else kept stabbing. Carl Jung didn't write this script, but he warned us about the quiet ways we betray our soul to avoid discomfort. Buddhism doesn't condemn those who fall into patterns. It simply says, now that you're awake, walk differently. And Ram Dass, he'd probably laugh and say, well, look at that. You finally realized you were sitting on a thorn for 30 years. This isn't about cutting everyone off and moving to a mountain unless the Wi-Fi's good. It's about no longer negotiating your peace for proximity. It's about no longer mistaking guilt for love. It's about remembering that your presence in this world is not a favor to others. It's a fact, so take a breath. Write this in the comments if you're ready. What I tolerate buries me. Let it be your first rebellion. A soft one, a sacred one, a real one. You don't need permission to protect your soul. You just need to stop pretending your pain is polite.